We will then move on to item 4, study session. Review, item A, review proposed reductions. Proposed reductions to cost recovery levies for certain user fees presented at the March 2nd, 2021 City Council meeting, and provide direction to staff. And there's also an item B, which is receive Community and Economic Development Department Organizational Review Report from Municipal Resources Group, LLC. And I will turn it over to the city manager.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, and members of the public. We are here tonight as a follow-up from our March 2nd study session on the master fee schedule and the cost allocation plan. Tonight's presentation will be provided by Craig Whittam, a consultant from MRG who has been assisting us to bring this home. And so you have a report that has been submitted tonight that has updated information responding to council questions, as well as modifications to the recommendations that we made on March 2nd. And so all of those are shown in the report, and in the tables, you really have 3 columns for the high-level fees that we're talking about tonight. That is a recommendation for today's date, April 29th. We show you what the March 2nd recommendation was, as well as the current fee. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Craig Whittam to provide the presentation. And then I will be here, as well as all of your department heads are available for tonight's meeting to address any questions with regard to the fees for their department.
Thank you. Mr. Whittam.
First step is those slides on the background.
So the objective for tonight is we are seeking input and direction from the City Council with regard to the proposed reductions in the cost recovery levels for certain fees based on your feedback. The presentation agenda is background on our user fee project, draft cost recovery policy, and then we'll review those proposed reductions with you and then discuss proposed next steps. Background on our fee setting practice. So annually, as you know, the City Council reviews fees during our budget process. However, our last comprehensive update was last done for the fiscal year 2005-2006. And so it's really important that we re-baseline our fees, because as per state law, while we can't charge more than our costs, we know now that on a number of our fee line items, we are charging significantly less than our cost, which means that there's a general fund subsidy. And on some areas that is appropriate, on other areas that may not be appropriate. And as you know, we've been having those discussions. The funding for fees cover the full range of city services, everything from development review, as well as public goods services, such as our park and recreation services. We know that there's never a good time to increase fees, but it's really critical that we have this discussion now, and in this discussion with rebaselining where we should be with all of our fees, and really that's policy. And so, yes, you have staff recommendations before you, and we've adjusted those with your input, but this is really the City Council and one of your more critical policy setting rules, which is cost recovery for city services. What services will be subsidized, what services will not be subsidized, and then again, just compliance with state law. The state constitution says that we cannot charge more than the cost reasonably borne, which is sort of government speak to say you can't charge more than your cost. However, there are some services where we can charge higher than our cost, and that is when the government is not the sole provider. Classic example is swim classes. We are not the only entity that can provide swim classes, and so we're allowed to base our fees based on that market, or decide if there's a subset of swim lessons that we want to subsidize. Maybe youth swim lessons we'll subsidize. And so we've had those discussions, and there are a few fee categories where we can talk about that again tonight. As a background, what are we talking about when we say fees? Not just enterprise fees, but we're discussing fees for development review, program and service fees. The classic example is recreation, but then there are also operational fees, and those are copying charges, process charges for routine business items. And so, high-level overview of our comprehensive fiscal sustainability project. I know the City Council knows about this, so we won't go in any detail. But just this is one of those long-term strategies. We've done so much work. We have so much to be proud of. But this effort as a part of rebaselining our fees is truly critical to our fiscal health. And so that's why we're addressing it now. And as a part of the model, there is an annual inflator, so we do not become as out of date as we are, where there's such a non-congruency between our costs and the fees that we're charging. So again, we have so much to be proud of with what we've done with the comprehensive fiscal sustainability project. These slides we've talked a lot about, and so I won't go into them in detail, but we did want to leave this slide here for you just because we've addressed revenue enhancements, we've shifted costs that were a threat to the general fund, things that we were not able to fund, but if we were not able to address them, it truly became a threat to the health of the general fund. And so there's a list there. There's PG&E wildfire mitigation work that we're still doing today, adjusting city net, transitioning after school programs, and then a number of things in stormwater. And we've controlled expenditures, and I know council and the public knows that very well. And there are a number of ongoing efforts. This is not the only one. So it is the first listed under our revenue enhancements. But at Tuesday's council meeting, we addressed the next item down under revenue enhancements, and that's the sale of the Crossings property and getting reinvestment in that property to provide ongoing revenue to the city. And then next down there is all the development related community benefit packages that we're working on. We continue to control expenditures, and as the public knows, we have gone through a long process to take a look at the health of our stormwater fund and the $30 million projects that need to be done for the health and safety of the community. And we have a valid effort out now to address that. So with that, I will turn it over to Craig Whittam, who will talk about our user fees and the draft policy that you have before you.
Thanks very much, Javon. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Pleasure to be here. First, we'll discuss the draft cost recovery policy. We talked about this on March 2nd and won't go into the same level of detail, but in summary, this provides a framework for the council to communicate to the public what the costs are of its fees and which fees it chooses to subsidize by policy. Once this is established, the policy could be reviewed and modified as the council experiences the residents and stakeholders' permit activity. This also creates flexibility for staff to respond to circumstances that are unusual. Example of that would be the recreation programs that were developed during the pandemic. There are three types of cost recovery categories. We have the full cost recovery or near full cost recovery. We'll talk a little bit later about how Will Dan Associates, who is also present by Zoom, if there are questions, calculated the full cost of all of the fees. Then you have medium cost recovery, which is not getting full cost recovery. Example of that is some of the recreation programs. And then there's low cost recovery. The policy really hasn't changed much since March 2nd. What has changed, we'll go over in a few minutes, is that in the March 2nd report, staff was recommending full cost recovery for a wider range of activities. Once we received feedback from the council, you'll see the changes that are presented tonight. And we'll move right into those. So, March 2nd, for the first time in many years, you saw a full presentation with a complex and a bit daunting list of all of your fees and what full cost recovery meant, and a preliminary recommendation regarding which fees would be full cost recovery and which wouldn't. So what happened since then? We reviewed the recreation-related fees with the Parks and Rec Commission. Anne is here tonight, and she'll jump in on that slide and talk about what they had to say about the proposed new structure, flexibility, and the new fees. We also heard that there were large increases in the current economic environment were challenging for the city and for the community. And you will see later in the presentation that particularly on the highly complex planning related fees that were increasing very significantly because they had not been increased for some time and involve a lot of staff time, that we're recommending to pull those back from what was presented on March 2nd. We also heard a discussion during the March 2nd item in terms of paying attention to how the fees impact certain groups of prospective applicants. We heard about the council's concern. Example would be the encroachment permits where folks are trying to do the right thing by installing proper storm drainage. We heard questions about additions and remodels and how that would be impacted. And then we heard a discussion in terms of how new and commercial residential projects would be impacted. So the first item in terms of how staff is responding to those concerns would be the Parks and Rec Commission feedback. And I'm going to turn it over to Anne, who will, you don't need to use the clicker because it's one slide. And we'll talk about that meeting.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Medina, and council members. So after the March 2nd meeting, we went to the communities, to the Parks and Recreation Commission on March 17th to pretty much give them the same proposal that the presentation that we presented to you. And they gave us a lot of very positive feedback. They also recognized that the fee schedule will be greatly simplified for the users. We talked a little bit about being responsive to be able to create programs and assign a fee with it as trends changed in case of unusual circumstances similar to what COVID presented, and they recognized the importance of allowing that. And there was certain discussions similar to what we've heard from council about raising fees now. But they also saw that we built in flexibility in these fee ranges, in that we will have a cost recovery policy that would also kind of ensure that we wouldn't have these big jumps in the cost to our programs. Another note, which I think is on there, is that when we are as we're building our programs, we're being very mindful of making sure that the service delivery is of a cost model that is in pretty much keeping in the range of what our payers are accustomed to paying.
Thanks, Anne. Okay. So the next section of the presentation is regarding information that is being provided in response to the March 2nd questions. The following slides will address number of common permits issued, comparison to cities that have conducted recent user fee studies. That was a question during the March 2nd meeting. Discussion of equity, small business impacts. We have a chart with the impacts of the building permit, proposed changes on a range of renovation projects, and then also a description of the fully burdened rate calculation, which is attachment to your staff report. Okay, so number of common permits issues. One of the questions on the second was, what are we talking about in terms of how many of these fees are issued each year? We pulled this information together from your staff. And as you can see, the volume of common permits varies quite significantly. And as staff reviewed that, you'll see later in terms of one of the recommendations, encroachment permit, building license application, or some of the high volume fees, that those are proposed to be reduced from the level that was presented on March 2nd. This fee, maybe a little bit easier to read in the staff report, is a comparison of the proposed 429 fee levels to those in communities that have recently gone through a full user fee update and made decisions in terms of where to price their services. I would reiterate, as Tony Thrasher from Wildan did in the March 2nd meeting, it's very difficult to compare fees from one city to the next, in that cities make different decisions regarding cost recovery. They have different processes to execute similar fees, and they have been through user fee studies at different points in time. With that said, the council asked for it, and we think it's a good idea to at least see within the range where San Bruno would sit relative to some of the cities that have recently gone through a fee increase. And I'm not going to go through each of these, but you can see that generally the new proposed fees, not necessarily the fees on March 2nd, are within the general range of the fees from these two cities, El Cerrito and Union City, that have recently gone through fee updates. There was a healthy discussion on March 2nd in terms of small business impacts and equity impacts. The staff had presented a recommendation to full cost recover a number of fees in this category among the common fees. What we've presented tonight is the chart that shows the difference in terms of what was presented on the 2nd. As an example, business license application had a healthy discussion. Currently in the $26 to $36, full cost recovery would be $235. Staff is recommending tonight that get moved to $94. Peddlers, again, a reduction, and sign permit as well, recognizing that impacts small businesses, bringing that from the full cost recovery to a medium cost recovery. Again, a conscious subsidy just policy decision by the city council, but staff is recommending a lower level of cost recovery. This is the impact on the range of renovation projects. No changes to the proposed fee levels for building permits, but this information was requested and was not available in the March 2nd report. And it gives you a sense as to what the costs now are of permits in these type of renovations, 20,000, 60,000, 120, and how those fees are proposed to change. Again, the takeaway from this slide, and it does vary by category, is that the lower project renovations are increasing, not as much as the higher cost increases in home renovation projects. Okay, so that kind of is a summary of what is in the staff report in more detail in terms of what the council requested. And now we'll move on to proposed reductions from the March 2nd levels and where that sits for these type of fees, those that are low-cost health and safety improvements. Again, there was a discussion as an example on the water permits. We want to motivate residents to do the right thing on health and safety improvements. And the message from the council, and it was a good one, is let's not price these at such a high level that folks will not get a permit. We want them to do the right way and not be priced out of the activity of making the community safer. We looked at certain small business impact fees and also the fees that kind of are the ones that jump out at you saying, how can you possibly be raising fees by X thousand dollars? And so we'll go over those as well. Okay, so the low cost health and safety improvement fees among the common fees. Water heater, I just mentioned, current fees 55. At our March 2nd meeting, proposal was to about almost triple that. to full cost recovery. It does take the time of a building inspector to go out and inspect it. This was basically a 1-hour charge. But upon reflecting on the council's input, the recommended approach is to bring that down to 78, which is not about half of full cost recovery. Similarly, we looked through the fee schedule and tried to identify some common fees that are safety related and relatively low cost. The other two that we're recommending for at a lower fee level are backflow preventive devices to protect the integrity of the potable water in folks' homes, and the encroachment permit, which was discussed by the council at the last meeting. And this is a common theme, the same, this is fees with a disproportionate impact on small businesses. We've tried to be consistent in terms of the recommended changes. All of them were at full cost or near full cost recovery, and all of them are being moved to the medium cost recovery. Recognizing, as the city manager mentioned, it is important to recalibrate these fees, but there are certain fees that, given the impact on small businesses in this particular time, staff thinks it makes sense to bring those back. So talked about these a little earlier in a previous slide, business license app, peddlers, and sign permit, bringing down to medium cost recovery as well. Okay, so these are the kind of eye-popping fee levels and that were discussed briefly during the March 2nd meeting. And they are pretty exclusively related to fees in the planning division. And these are fees for large increases or that were proposed for large increases, in part because these fees haven't been increased by a long time, in part due to the complexity of the fee levels, the number of public hearings that some of these fees may require. And the list is, again, maybe a little easier to read in your staff report, but we show you the proposed fee, which is still a significant increase in a number of cases, but significantly less than what was proposed on March 2nd. And typically these fees, I think it's important to note, are often involved with either commercial entities that are making significant investments on the project. So as these fees look large, and in fact are relatively large in the scale of the overall project, not necessarily as large. But we, again, wanted to present what was the current fee proposed tonight and what we came to the council with on March 2nd. Okay, this is another important consideration that, again, upon reflection from the council's input, when we were in front of you on March 2nd, the prior recommendation was if a fee is increasing by more than 50%, let's spread that over 2 years to limit the impact. Took another look at the fees and the number of fees that were increasing by more than 100%, and thought that those had it would be more important to focus a gradual increase on those fees. And the recommendation tonight is to spread any fee that would be increasing by 100% by 4 years. That also has some kind of logic to it in that most cities' best practices are to go through one of these painful exercises every 5 years. And if you increase some of the higher increasing fees over the next 4 years, it would be a gradual ramp up, and then you would be soon readdressing your fee levels at your different, where you sit as a community in 5 years from now. Those are the fee changes that are proposed in tonight's staff report. There are 2 attachments to your staff report that have been updated since March 2nd. The attachment number 1 is the cost recovery policy. Very minor changes. It addresses the 4-year ramp up in fees and a couple of just clarifying changes, nothing other than that substantively. Wildan, which was the firm that is in the business of doing these fee studies, ensuring that there is proper evaluation of how many hours each fee takes to process their, their user fee study has been updated and reflects the new information that I just reviewed. Next steps, I'm going to turn that one over to City Manager and would be happy to answer any questions as they arise. Thank you.
The next steps is staff has conducted a consistency with all proposed fees with state law. We may recommend some municipal code changes to ensure consistency as we proceed through our muni code review. A number of the fees relate to sections that are in our muni code, and as the council knows, we've been gradually stepping through a muni code review. We do feel comfortable that we have done the analysis, and then based on council comments from March 2nd, we went through and did another check to ensure consistency with state law. But there may be some muni code changes that we want to recommend. And so we will do that as we step through those reviews. So after we receive direction and input tonight, we will then return to the city council for formal action on June 22nd. That will also be the night where we are considering our budget adoption. And so should the city council provide direction tonight, we will incorporate these new fees and the revenue into the budget that you have presented to you when you adopt your budget. And so that new revenue will be captured in the 2021 budget. We will provide notice by July 1. Some user fees will take effect on July 1. For some fees, primarily the development-related fees, there is a 60-day waiting period, and so those will take effect on September 1st. And we are here tonight to answer any questions. Again, department heads are available, as well as Will Dan and Craig Whittam, who project managed this project for us. Thank you.
Thank you for the staff report. Again, this is a study session, and this was on the presentation that we just viewed. I'd like to ask if there's anybody in the audience that would like to speak on this. If you could raise your virtual hand, I will call upon you. And this is just for item A that's on the agenda, and we'll do the same for item B, but just in case. Not seeing any. And I know the city clerk will always stop me if I've overlooked, but not seeing anything for item A, we'll bring it back to the city council. Yes,
I see we have one phone-in listener. Should we quickly say how to raise your hand if you're on the phone? Because that's not always clear.
Okay.
Just in case that person, I don't know if that's even if that's a member of the public.
I'm not sure if it's staff or not, and you're absolutely correct. City clerk?
To raise your virtual hand by calling in, you would press *9.
Thank you.
Thank you. I thought it was, but I wanted to make sure I didn't do the wrong digit. Okay, to council for questions, please, on the presentation, and to staff, etc. No questions? Vice Mayor Medina.
Always have questions, Mayor Medina. First a comment, a couple comments. Thank you, staff. You guys said it right. It's never a good time, the right time to tell somebody that we're going to start charging more for something. Nobody wants to pay more. Most people who work want to get paid more. So we have kind of contrasting things happening there. But as a council, being that we haven't looked at this, our previous councils haven't acted on it since 2005 and 2006. Inflation in the United States has gone up 35.6%. So something that cost $100 in 2005, 2006 costs $135.60 on average. And what happens is that our tax dollars go to subsidize that cost that someone else is taking, and we're reducing the amount of money that we can spend on our police, on our fire, and our recreation programs, library. So at some point, we have to stop subsidizing things, and we have to get closer to recovering the money that we need to do everything else that people want. So my first question is, there was a slide earlier on, and I'm sorry I didn't write the number. The low cost recovery, it was a wide range from 0 to 39%. What things are we not getting any recovery on? And what things are like at the very low end? I was wondering if staff could answer that question first.
Sure. We're gonna first direct that to Will Dan, who prepared the study. So Tony Thrasher, actually, Melissa, I see that he's in attendees. Can you bring Mr. Thrasher in the room?
And I don't know if it was slide 11 on the medium cost, low cost. Is that the one?
I'm sorry, let me go back to the presentation.
You don't have, yeah, that's the cost recovery categories, sample fee types by category?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
And Councilmember Medina, just to be clear, your question is, are there any fees that we are receiving zero cost recovery on?
Right, and let me double check here. Yeah, and it's just interesting that that's a really wide range from 0 to 39%. That we're not and I was just curious on what lower levels are we just not recovering anything, and I don't need that for. It'd be nice to have that just to understand what the things we're fully subsidizing, because that's the equivalent of what we're talking about. When we don't recover anything, that means the city's paying for it all. Correct?
And so know that within the Wildan report, towards the latter section, there's a list of each fee and the cost recovery percentage. I believe there's over 500 fees. And so we can.
Very few there.
Yeah, we can.
I didn't have the time to go through and I was just curious, like and maybe we can get that information later. But it's an interesting question if you think about it. Like what is happening out there where it's paid for entirely by the city?
Yeah, I can help a little bit with that. So in general, there aren't many cases where that happens. In recreation, that can happen when you're fully subsidizing because you don't want to charge, say, for resident use of a park, and you don't charge, the rental of a gazebo or something like that. I think in your case, you have an example would be, I just had it. It changed on me. Let me try this right here. There we go. So while I'm trying to find it, another example is in public records requests where you are only allowed to charge for duplication, right?
Got it.
Usually if there's a state mandate that you can't charge for something, that commonly comes. But when you're looking at a lot of the new fees, it's not necessarily a new service being provided. It's that a service is changed or being split out from another one so that you can ensure that you're getting a proper cost recovery for that service rather than it being lumped with something else. So it actually ends up adding more utility, more benefit to the community, because then it's more specialized to what they're asking for. But if you're looking specifically for things that city is not charging for, not getting cost recovery, it would be specifically within Parks and Recreation where that would be the case.
Okay. I can be happy to look at that list a little closer later. For I guess a little explanation for the public to have a better understanding of, for the large, and this is slide 23, for the large fees, what's happening there is these fees are associated with larger projects or projects that require additional meetings, publicly noticed meetings to deal with a special type of request, either to expand beyond the normal allowed building, to get a variance or something. So it's rather limited, and I was wondering staff could give like a ballpark of how many of those type of activities are actually done in a typical year to get a use permit, for example.
Sure, Councilmember Medina, while Director Wu finds that number, we believe it's in the staff report. I've just looked through all of the fees, and going back to your question of what fees are we receiving zero cost recovery, it is the category that Tony Thrasher mentioned, as well as the only other one that I could find was in the library, where you may recall about a year and a half ago, we eliminated the fee for late library books, late library materials.
Got it. Okay.
And within the fee schedule, there's a number of categories that say NA, and one of them are some of those are when the fee is a percentage of work that is done, and the other no fee category is actually reinspection. And so for development related items, we do not charge a fee for the first reinspection, but there is a fee for the second and third reinspections.
Vice Mayor, so the number of single family residential use permits, listed on staff report page 2, we issued a total of 5 in 2020, a total of 7 in 2019. And as we don't normally get a request for variance, the number has been 0 for some time. Another popular planning permit is a sign permit. We also included in that chart. In 2020, we issued a total of 13, and in 2019, we issued a total of 21.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question I have is, has staff received public feedback from builders, contractors on these fee increases?
Since the last meeting, to my knowledge, we have not had any builders or contractors reach out to the city and provide feedback, and I do not believe we had any during the public comment on March 2nd.
Got it. Thank you. I have a comment on the sign permits, and if we go ahead and raise the fees as recommended, the council could go back and provide like an incentive program for new businesses to have a reduced fee on their signs, or let's say in a certain area, either downtown, town center, where the signs are kind of getting kind of old, kind of just need to be refreshed, that we could provide an incentive and reduction in permit fees to have those businesses be incentivized to refresh their signs?
So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is most typically those structures are set up where you do not change your fee structure, but you set up a program that provides essentially a grant
Okay.
that can go toward the cost of the fees.
All right, I have two more questions. With the recreation fees, as we have a business plan, and I couldn't find the pricing on how much it's going to be for a San Bruno resident to kind of join the pool or the gym. Do we have any additional clarity on a range of prices for those fees?
So with regard to the new recreation and aquatic center, those fee structures have not been developed yet, but they are covered within the cost recovery percentages that are within the model. And so as we develop the detailed, essentially recreation guide and fee schedule for the new building, we will follow the policy that's outlined with here.
And will the council be able to give final approval to those increases? Separate than what we're going to do now? Or do we get another chance to look at that? And I'm a little apprehensive to say yes to that question now, but I think it should come back, and the council should have the final say when the numbers are fully developed.
So yes, we can bring the new fee structure for the recreation and aquatic center to the city council. There will be sort of plenty of opportunities to have dialogue around that. There will be at least 2 budget years where we will be going through the budget as we develop the fee schedule for the new programs. And so we can certainly come back to the city council and provide a presentation and city council input at that time.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Thank you. So Vice Mayor Medina asked, I have 3 questions, but Vice Mayor Medina asked one of them in a slightly different way, but I think I have my answer. It was basically, I was going to ask if this structure would still allow us to designate one or more economic zones within the city where we might want to move certain specific fees into a lower cost recovery tier. But what I'm hearing is that staff would recommend, instead of doing that, to instead establish a grant program to leave the fees where they are, but establish a grant program to help subsidize them in that way. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. And then my other 2 questions are about 2 specific fees. The administrative review for wireless facility, is that where like a large telecom provider to put in a cell tower or a small cell site?
Yes, Councilmember Hamilton, that is exactly, and we don't see many of those anymore, as most of them are either small cell or they're just adding antennas. So this will be a fee where they're taking down the poles, putting up a new structure, replacement structure, or substantially increasing the amount, the height or amount of antennas.
You're saying it doesn't apply to small cell?
It does not apply to small cell.
Okay. Regardless, I'm just wondering why we wouldn't have that one in the full recovery one, considering it's not like we're impacting homeowners or small businesses or with that fee.
We can definitely do that.
Yeah, that's a policy decision by the city council. That's a reasonable question and an adjustment. We tried to bring back a consistent pattern moving to medium cost recovery, but that's a good example where a policy decision could be different.
Councilmember Hamilton, before you go on, just because I had that question, that was my first one, and the city attorney is now here, so he may wish to add something.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just we're talking about why those fees couldn't apply to small cell facilities. Is that right?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, that wasn't the question I was asking. The question I was asking is why would we decide to have the fee, even if it's not applying to small cell, why would we have the fee that would apply to a full cell tower be in the medium tier rather than the full tier?
Understood. Okay, so that's a different question, and I agree with the answer.
Okay. And while you're there, sure, I'm curious why does it apply to a small cell?
Well, so what I was going to say to, if the question were different, was that there's a fair bit of scrutiny, and as we all know, legislation that's still subject to challenge in the federal courts regarding the FCC small cell order, and provisions of that order affect the ability of cities to recover costs for those applications. And while there is some flexibility in that order, I think it's the amount that the city charges for those facilities is likely to be much more highly scrutinized than it is for the sort of large towers that I think you were referring to in your earlier question. Mm-hmm. So we have been advised both by our independent review of the law and by our outside counsel that we should sort of carefully approach what any substantial increases in the cost of those applications if they apply only or primarily to small cell facilities. Okay,
because I would think if we can demonstrate and prove that we're recovering our own costs, that has to be legal. Subsidize. Having them put the small cell sites into San Bruno against our will and making us pay for part of it. That really seems pretty egregious.
Right. I think the argument on the other side and what perhaps motivated the order was the sense that cities should not be spending really any time reviewing these applications. And so for lack of a better term, how hard could it be and how much time could it possibly take to approve these on a ministerial basis? Well, as we know, it is quite time consuming, but I absolutely agree with your sentiment, Councilmember Hamilton.
Okay, thank you. My other question has to do with the business license application fee. So I'm glad to see that it's come down. It's under $100. And I believe me, I am listening to the presentation and the argument that when you compare one city to another, it's not apples to apples necessarily. But I still can't help but notice that we are, higher and in some cases substantially higher than our neighbors on that one. And I'm just wondering if we have any information as to why we in San Bruno would necessarily have a higher cost for that, for processing a business license application. And then I guess also, would that change in any way with the action that we took the other night to outsource that and outsource that process? And I guess that's my question.
I'll give a short response and then I'll turn it over to Pamela, who can talk about kind of what happens in San Bruno when somebody comes in for a business license application. In some cities, there is a varying level of cost recovery. So some cities may have had a small fee, and when a user fee study comes up, the council simply says, let's keep it low. On the other hand, certain cities have different levels of scrutiny when a new business comes in for an application in terms of reviewing the zoning and having someone from the planning shop take a look to ensure that the zoning is proper. Some cities are more diligent than others in terms of reviewing new business license applications, frankly. What we thought was important during this whole process is to give the council and the public an understanding of what the city does, how much it costs, and then it's the council's, obviously, it's your policy call as to how to cost recover on that. And there was a discussion earlier in the March 2nd meeting in terms of, are we doing things most efficiently? And that's always also a concern, and I think you're seeing some changes in terms of how zoning ordinances are being presented to the council to make things simpler, make things more efficient. I know I've seen that in terms of my limited time here. So it's possible that some things that are currently being done one way and generating a fee level 5 years from now, you may have less hours going into that review, and I'll turn it over to Kelly.
Sure, Craig, and you explained it beautifully. So Councilmember Hamilton, whether or not we have the most efficient process, that's besides the point. Currently, if anyone who wants to open a business in City San Bruno, they'll come to the finance counter, ask for a business license application, then we'll ask them to talk to a planner to see if the business is even allowed. And then we go into to evaluate zoning and then go through the proper consultation and then ask them if we need a building permit. Then we send an inspector, building inspector, along with a fire marshal to go out and do a fire inspection. Then we come back and says, okay, well, now you can have a business license. Then we evaluate and then issue a business compliance permit and go back to finance staff to finish the business license compliance process. Again, whether or not this is the most streamlined process, that's besides the point. So the fee that Wellsden proposed is generated based on our current process.
Okay, so you're saying that if you with this proposed cost of $94, I'm getting all of that service that you just described for $94.
Correct.
And just to speak on kind of what your neighbors are likely doing, they likely have separate fees or different charges that kind of add to that smaller charge that they have, or they consider their collection of, they might have a higher business license collection, and so they simply offset the cost with that sort of revenue too. That was going to be my next question, is it possible that our neighbors would have a separate fee for the fire inspector to come out, and it's not part of their business license application, but they need to do it in order for it to get their application? Absolutely. Okay. All right, thank you. I think that is it for my question to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, comments from council? Councilmember Mason?
Great, thank you for the presentation. I do have a couple of questions, and I think I'll start off with where Councilmember Hamilton's question left off. I understand, Director Wu, the position of, whether this streamlines the process or not isn't like the point right now. But I will say that this was prior to your time as director, but when I was a planning commissioner, I definitely got an earful after many, many meetings from businesses and residents about how difficult the process in San Bruno was. And I think that, it's important to, kind of be honest about those conversations when we're talking about raising fees. And so I'm wondering if what is the return to the public who's paying these fees? Will this be able to provide staffing that will be able to supplement? I understand that we have overworked employees right now in planning department, but what are they getting in return for these fees?
So, Councilmember Mason, let me take the first part about that, and Director Wu can add. So there are benefits on a number of levels. First off, by higher cost recovery, that means less general fund subsidy, which means more general fund money to spend on general city services, be that police, fire, library, parks, rec, road maintenance. In particular, we have a very small planning staff. At this point, 2 current planners and a planning manager position that is currently vacant, which means that the pipe, our capacity, is limited because of our staffing. With additional revenue, we can increase our staffing and have more capacity to get things done quicker so people are not waiting or put in line with the queue. We are currently flexing our staffing with contractors. Sometimes that is a perfect solution. For example, when you have a large development project, contracting that out can allow that project to move faster, and that big project isn't consuming all of the capacity. So when the average homeowner comes in with a small addition or water heater permit, that they're not getting good service. However, because our staffing is so limited now, with only 2 planners, someone has to manage all of those larger contracts that are being done by contractors. So we still have reduced capacity available for, let's call it the regular work, because we have for example, 7.5 of our 2 FTEs managing the various contracted planners, and then part of our director's time managing the contracted planners. So additional revenue really allows us to increase that pipe. It also allows us to be flexible, because in development review, what you want to do is you never want to staff to the peak, because when the workload drops, you don't want to have staff that don't have anything, any permits to work on. And so it will better allow us to have this sort of perfectly flexible model between city staff and contractors.
So will there be any estimates provided to us of what the potential is to the potential revenue stream would be, and how that will be turned around and reinvested into the planning department?
Yeah, so you will first see that during the budget process, because right now we're very fluid in the cost recovery percentages. So once we have some direction, we will build revenue projections into the budget. I will say though, the first thing we need to do is to build an enterprise. We're talking development review. Let's take out planning department. How the planning department right now is budgeted, they're budgeted just as a regular general fund department. And so when they have a good year, that revenue may go towards the general fund. When they have a bad year in that not enough permits, or the revenue isn't covering all of their expenses, the general fund provides a subsidy. What we need to do is create our planning development review functions as an enterprise, that in the good years when there's a lot of capacity and they're taking in revenue, that develops a fund balance. So in the good years and the bad years, they can pull from their fund balance. In the bad years, they can pull from their fund balance, so the general fund isn't going through this seesaw of subsidizing planners that work on current development projects. And so we need to begin by sort of establishing that fund and ensuring that fund can operate sufficiently and sustainably, and then do projections on when we can appropriately add staff.
And that'll be, so the budget approval will be which day?
June 22nd.
Okay, and so we will have already seen, as part of the budget process, you'll have let us know what the expected revenue would be from this particular increase, right?
That will be factored into our revenue projections in the proposed budget that you receive. Okay.
And then what is the plan for the rollout of this? I see that there's a notice posted would be on July 1st. When you say notice posted, what does that mean exactly?
We'll post it to our website. We will provide the notice to all of our active projects or people that we are talking to that may have come in the door and did a pre-application. So they haven't yet pulled a permit, but they've just been inquiring with the city about doing a potential development. And we'll update our website. Typically for these key updates, because it literally crosses almost everything we do, there's not sort of a mass mailing or social media notification. It's really communicating with your active customers and making sure that it's on your website. So when private development is thinking about a project, they oftentimes, the first thing they do is they download our master fee schedule as they're making their pro forma to build their project budget. And so we need to make sure that it's there for those projects that we may not know about for several months.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question around the private developers. How does this impact some of the projects that we've already approved? I would just refer to anything that might be, I don't know, Mills Park, YouTube, Huntington, without picking anyone specifically, depending on where they are in their process. How will this impact their projects?
Councilmember Mason, so it will not, so the planning fees will not affect any of the project that's already in the pipeline. So the Artichoke Joe's, the 271 El Camino, or the 160 El Camino Hotel, they have submitted their fees. It's not going to change. However, when they come in for the building permit, that will change. We're also proposing to realign our building permit fee. So when they are coming in to do plan check and other inspections, that's when they will be subject to the new fee. In terms of the YouTube world, phase 1 has submitted their fee. Phase 2 through 5 will be subject to the new fees.
Okay. Can you give a little bit more information around the phase-in and what that looks like?
I think you're referring to the 4-year phase-in. Okay, I will turn that over to Mr. Whittam.
Right, and thank you, council member, for the question. There are certain fees that are proposed to increase by 100% or about 100 fees. That is reduced from the amount that were proposed on the March 2nd item, but those fees would be, if the council approves this approach, would be increased by 25% on September 1st of 2021, another 25% by July 1st of the next year, and then 25% and 25%. So the total fee increase would be spread over 4 years as a way to moderate the impact on those fee increases. And again, most of those are in the building and planning fees. Most of them are increasing. The total fee is increasing less than $500, and that's kind of laid out in the staff report. But it's an attempt to moderate the larger fee increases.
And are those, has anyone looked at, are those those that are phased in versus not phased in, are those impacting residents more versus larger businesses, or vice versa? Or is it just looked at as the larger increases are going to be the, the ones that are phased in? What is that trigger for a phase in? And then who is it most impacting?
The trigger is the percentage. So, and that is, again, of the 101 fees, it breaks down pretty neatly between building and planning and police and fire. And again, these are fees that a typical resident in the typical year would not encounter, these larger fee increases. The police and fire fee, a good example, we didn't run the numbers in terms of how many fees they issue each year, but they are much generally smaller than, and residents wouldn't typically encounter those.
Okay. So I see the breakdown between the departments, but I'm sorry, could you go into that just a little bit more? How are you figuring that it's going to be less residents if you have more fire and police?
I'm just talking from, and Tony may be able to jump in and give a little bit more fine-tuned response. I'm just talking about the typical resident is not encountering the fire department fee on an annual basis compared to the rec program, or renting out a room at one of your facilities, or the business license application, and someone's doing a tenant improvement to their commercial property. That might be a more common occurrence. that's my only point on the frequency. And Tony usually has something more intelligent to add than what I said, so he may in this case as well.
And then after that, let's go to the city attorney.
Yeah, so what Craig is referring to is that those fees affect development primarily. So if we're talking about specifically the ones in fire, for example, it's the larger increases are to like general permits. So, compressed gases, combustible material storage, stuff like that to ensure that there's compliance and there's proper storage and those sorts of things for those. And within planning and building, those are affecting your development community a lot more than it is your residents. And even then, so those services are purely private benefit. So when they're doing additions and such like that, it's usually at a portion of a project on their house as opposed to something that they have to do for compliance because of an existing issue, right? So it's the impact is on them improving as opposed to something being enforced upon them.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, just to very quickly follow up on that. So yes, I agree with all of that. I think it's important to note that just that very last point that Tony made, which is that for fees that residents are required to pay for a permit, and so that's different than, let's say, a swim lesson, because residents aren't required to have swim lessons, but they are required to pay a permit fee if they get a particular kind of permit. So for those fees, if there's going to be a distinction made between certain classes of people, there has to be a rational basis for that distinction. And so, for example, distinguishing among residents and non-residents for the same fee, providing the same service that residents are required to get, is something that we'd want to look at carefully before proposing or implementing it.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. For jumping to the business license, I appreciate that the fees were lowered. I did want to ask if the council has any discretion around exemptions.
So, I'm going to call the city attorney up, but I think it goes in that same equal protection and separating between classes of businesses. There really needs to be a rational policy and legal definition. But what cities typically do is they have a fee schedule, and then they would again set up a grant program to incentivize businesses to come and say, if you are X business, we want that in the downtown. Here's a grant to subsidize your costs, your startup costs.
Right, that's true. I would agree with that. And just quickly to extend that a little bit, those sorts of distinctions, for example, are already made in our ordinance regarding business license tax, where, for example, nonprofits may not have to pay a fee, and there are other exemptions. But when you take particular classes of for-profit businesses, for example, and say these businesses do have to pay and those businesses don't, then again, we would need to look at that carefully. One way to address that is you can have a reduced tax rate for certain businesses. And so that's something that certainly can be looked at. But remember, you can't raise the rate of business license tax on any business, the tax itself, not the fee for filling out the form, but the tax itself without a vote of the people. So.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I think it would be too controversial picking and choosing which business gets an exemption. I think that really it's the kind of the individuals who have painted these utility boxes are the ones who just really are a thorn in my side, that they have to pay such a huge percentage of what they get in a business, because this is a really, I don't know, the process that has been laid out. So I know we eventually will be looking at that ordinance, and we're not there yet. But in the meantime, if there's a way that if this city is going to require a business license for these artists, if there's a way that we either exempt them, or we make the fee specific to them, or maybe that it's a grant program, but then we're still paying into something that just, I feel like we really shouldn't even be charging a fee for someone who's really providing a service to our city. And honestly, it's supposed to be an accomplishment, right? To be the artist selected to do this, and then it's like we hand them a bill that takes away what they just won, a percentage of what they just won. So I would love if by the time this comes to us, we have some kind of solution to that. And if that solution is changing the ordinance, as we've talked about in the past, then when that will be coming to us, so that we actually have a solution to that date or that problem. The other question.
Can I address that point really quickly, because we will not have a solution to that when this comes back to you. And so just so everyone knows clearly what we're talking about, we had a process ran out of our Cultural Arts Commission where we pay artists to develop graphics for utility boxes. And I'll probably get the numbers wrong, but for example, we paid them, call it $500, or provided them a $500 stipend to paint. And then those artists who were selected through a process then had to, like all of our vendors have to, get a business license because we are paying them money. We require, whether it's a construction contract where it's $1 million contract or $50,000 professional services, every vendor in the city that does business with the city has to get a business license. And so these artists had to get a business license, and they had to both pay the administration fee because they were a new business, and two, pay the business tax, whatever that was. It was likely I don't remember the structure for artists, but let's call it a percentage or $100. And so they may have received a $500 stipend, but when they paid the admin fee and the business tax, they received $350. And so the mechanism for that, because we can't change the policy and say artists don't have to pay a business license administration fee. When we contract for things like that, we can up the value that we contract for to cover that cost that every other business has to pay for, but we're making essentially a policy decision through that contracting based on the dollar value that, we want artists, but so instead of paying $500, we're going to pay $650 to cover the overall, the admin and the business tax. So it's neither a master fee solution nor a business tax solution. It's a contracting solution that we apply to those vendors.
Councilmember Mason, can I ask a question on that point, just for clarity? So that's what I was going to say. When they put in an application for their time, their supplies, the expenses, even the mural over at the train station, there was expenses for the transportation of it, etc. That's what I was going to ask, is why wouldn't that then just be included in that artist saying, I need X, which also encompasses that? And I think you said that is viable. Correct? City Manager, you're on mute.
Sorry, we were on mute. The answer is yes. And this particular issue was because a program was set up and the dollar value that was provided was frankly too close to the cost to acquire a business license and pay the taxes. So we just need to address that going forward when we.
I can see why. Okay, got it. I'm sorry. Thank you, Councilmember, and back to Councilmember Mason.
Thank you. And I can't find it now, but there is, I know that we did talk about, the city attorney and I talked about a potential change in the rule and as opposed to the fee, because other cities that are doing this are paying the same or even less for their artists to do the utility boxes. And I think that was really going to be the question, one of the questions was like, why are we doing it this way? But I think I don't want to have a whole conversation on it without you two talking, but there are some, city attorney Zephyron and I have had quite a few conversations around this, and my understanding is that there will be an ordinance coming to us at some point that we will likely be able to adjust that will address this issue. so I think the other question I had was around the water heater. So the water heater seems to be like lower than the other cities, and I'm curious to know why. I think it was touched on in the presentation, but it sounds like that's one of the areas where we have more staff time to go out to check, and so I'm just curious to know why.
City staff.
Ready? Okay. Councilmember Mason, Tony can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that the city has any less staff time or more staff time than another community. Typically with a water heater, you're going to send out a building inspector. It will take less than an hour to check to ensure that it is installed properly. So that's where the 156 full cost recovery comes from. And again, that's a high number in relation to how much the water heater costs itself. So the recommendation is to bring that down so you don't incentivize your residents to say, hey, I'm only paying $500, $700 to put this water heater in. I'm not going to pay another significant amount for the fee. So we're trying to help residents do the right thing, get the fee, get an inspection, ensure it's all proper at a lower cost recovery level.
How many times normally would someone go out for a water heater on a particular when these inspections are needed? Is it one time? Is it two times? I mean, and is this a charge per visit?
Typically one time, and this is a charge for that one time.
Okay, and if they need to go back, will they be charged again?
So our fee schedule has the first re-inspection free, and then the second and third re-inspection is at a fee.
Because that, just as an FYI, that is something I have heard is normally more than one visit. And that oftentimes, so it's like splitting the cost in half. So I was just curious to know why we decided on that one to keep it lower than the other cities. The other question I had was around appeals. I just want to be clear, I don't need to have a discussion, but I am opposed to raising the costs on all of the appeals. I think that we've already experienced this, I think, with cell towers and with a number of other areas. I always think of the whale. But, to appeal to the planning commissioner, doubling those fees, appeal to the city council is doubling those fees, and then appeal to the director's decisions, almost doubling those fees. I think I couldn't make that decision without actually understanding how many appeals we're getting. And I don't know, I think that it's already so difficult I'm thinking of cell towers in particular, where the way that the rule was written, that was approved locally here by the city council prior to my being on it, but where the appeal goes to the city manager and appeals to the planning commission. I don't remember receiving that many of them. I just think that if people, are appealing these projects, they're already spending a lot of money on them, especially if you're a homeowner. And I don't think we should make it so cost prohibitive. Most of the time, by the time there's an appeal, there's already an investment in San Bruno. And so I'd like to throw that out there, that I wouldn't support it without really understanding how many appeals we're talking about that are coming, to really understand how much staff time it's taking to respond to these and prepare for them.
And I'm not sure if the city attorney wants it, but if I may expand, because so when you answer, are these just in regards to building, or are these in regards to, like, when we had an appeal about someone's home needed to be cleaned up, and there was an appeal, right, that we went through? So is it all encompassing when we talk appeal, or is it just, because the council member sounded like was like on buildings, or because they have an investment? City attorney?
To clarify, it says appeal, that what we have in our slideshow is appeal to planning commission, appeal to city council, and appeal to director. So that's as much as as we have right now.
Correct. That's when it says city council, are we talking the gamut of, what do you call it, a license to operate at a casino? Is it the appeal of, you need to clean it up, but you're appealing that? So anyway, city attorney and then city manager.
Sure, I think I understand the question as well as the nuance regarding which kinds of appeals. So you're both correct. There are a variety of different kinds of appeals, and one kind is appeals of building projects, let's just say, to either the director or to the planning commission or to the city council. And then there's a variety of other appeals, like the mayor mentioned, that have to do with permits issued by various departments, like the police department. In any event, and I would say really in all of those events, and Director Wu can talk specifically about appeals of to the planning commission, we don't experience a great number of appeals, but when we do have those appeals, they are really extraordinarily time consuming, and some of them involve literally dozens of hours of both staff time and city attorney time to process properly. These appeals are important and we take them seriously. It's very important to make sure that people's due process rights are protected when they appeal, and to make sure that the process is done well, and make sure that we protect the city against risk if the property owner or the appellant, if it's not the property owner, decides that they want to go to court and sue. We need to have a good record. So while the appeals are, I would say, few and far between, they are very expensive, and even the fees that are currently proposed, I think, come nowhere close to matching the actual cost of processing those appeals.
Yeah. And if we will, process-wise, I do think that we should spend this time in this study session, our second study session, to talk about these items. Because when we come to you next, they will be built into the budget, and they will be on the June 22nd meeting, where you will be taking a comprehensive action to approve the budget. And there are a lot of budget decisions on that June 22nd meeting. So if council members have concerns, we should really use our time now in these study sessions to get direction and input, because we will be building these into the fee schedule, and you will get them with a comprehensive budget document.
So you're saying this actually wouldn't even be a separate resolution from the budget?
It will be a separate resolution from the budget. I think we do adopt our master fee schedule as a separate resolution. But what I'm saying is now sort of the time to engage on issues, concerns, and feedback. And if there are any significant ones, we would like to know that. And I just want to be clear on the process, because, we're building the budget and bringing you a comprehensive package of things to review and approve with the budget on June 22nd.
Okay. So I'm almost done. I just want to follow up on the comment about the appeals. So I do understand. I remember seeing I think 2 appeals while I was on planning, and I do understand how much time it takes, and so that's why I don't think the amount of money that's being increased is going to make that much of a difference to the city. But it might make a difference to a homeowner that is paying already to have their ADU built or to have their house built. To whether they want to lodge a complaint, or somebody who may not even know how to do it and know the process, and then think I now have to pay another however much money to have my complaint heard. And so I think if the city wants to do cost recovery, then it would be significantly more. But I think just to double it is only going to impede your single family homeowner from appealing. The big businesses are going to appeal, whether it's $700 or $1,000. So I would just say that I disagree with those increases altogether, all 3 of them. And then the last one is really more of a comment. I do love the idea of the grant around the signs, and would just encourage you all to consider adding it or expanding the small business attraction program that's in our initiatives already, so that we don't have to worry about waiting another year to get it on the initiatives, since we're going to be revisiting this in the budget cycle. And it could be part of the grant program for attracting small businesses again and expanding to maybe improving the quality of the existing businesses. So thank you for entertaining my questions.
Councilmember Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So first of all, I just want to thank staff for really listening to our comments last time and going through all the comments and all the review. It really looks like our comments were all taken to heart. So definitely the extra work in putting this together is appreciated. So thank you for bringing all that back. Definitely, feeling more comfortable with the approach we're taking now. It's a staged approach. It's something that's going to be more digestible to the people that this affects directly, and it starts putting us on the right track to where we want to be fiscally. So definitely appreciating that. I was concerned a little bit about, the incentives that we create by pricing things certain ways. And I think the Vice Mayor first raised the issue of incentives. Councilmember Hamilton also mentioned, how we're incentivizing people to do things and not. And so I will be interested in seeing how these changes are going to impact people's behavior going forward. And are we going to scare away new businesses from opening? Are we going to, as Councilmember Mason said, stop people from appealing when they have a legitimate reason to? So, it seems like we have a baseline now that we were provided in terms of how many of these items come before us. So if we're, keeping an eye on those things and just making sure that we're not encouraging the wrong things through code enforcement, are we make sure that we're not getting more complaints about people doing illegal construction or unpermitted construction, I should say, only because we raise the permit fees too high. So, I think there's an opportunity there to sort of keep an eye on things to make sure that we're not going afoul of our intent, which is really to serve the public better and provide a structure where we're doing our job of protecting the community. So that's it for my comments. There wasn't anything specific. We had some great questions already, so I have no further questions.
Okay, why don't we go to the Vice Mayor, and then I'll finish up with my comments and questions.
Great. Thank you. Two more questions. The filming permit, pretty interesting. That's a flat rate. Wouldn't we have more flexibility depending on how much work it really involved? And then I was thinking about that reinspection fee. As a former inspector, when you give somebody a free chance to fix something, you disincentivize them to do it right the first time. And so if somebody's got a building permit or encroachment permit and the rebar is supposed to be set a certain way and you come out for the inspection and it's like, oh, it's all wrong. Okay, it's free. I'll see you next time. No, I think we should stop that practice and it should be a full inspection fee of that time that it took that inspector to drive out there, take a look when the work should have been done right the first time. We're dealing with professional licensed contractors and they should do things right the first time. And we shouldn't subsidize their mistakes. So I'm going to really strongly suggest that we revise that because we shouldn't be paying for somebody's mistakes.
And then I'm going to go next because it's going to add on to the Vice Mayor's comment on two items. One is he talked about the first appointments. I also didn't know if there was something on missed appointments. What I mean by that is I schedule you to come out today at 4. We show up between the designated time and now we're not there. There are some cities that say we give you a pass the first time, but now we're going to charge you the next time because our staff has now had to go out to that, isn't able to provide service to somebody else. So that's accounting to what the Vice Mayor said. And on the filming, I was thinking the same thing. So if we go back in history and we had Suzanne Summers doing the Lifesaver commercial at Buckeye Park, that probably was quite a bit. Or are we talking about, I don't know, somebody videotaping on the gazebo? And I didn't know if that quantified the same, and how do you, because obviously there's a different levels. Some of my others are already talked about the wireless. We talked about appeals. When it comes back, what about fireworks appeals? I get $1,000 ticket. I'm appealing it, which they have a right to appeal. Is that included within those appeals? Because it doesn't come to the council, it doesn't come to the commission. Maybe it comes to a director, but I don't know if that's inclusive. But I also do know, just from history, is that sometimes before we may even get an appeal, it has maybe gone through. I can think of an example. I won't mention it, but an example where many staff members had sat and went back and forth for, I think, a couple days, and could come to no resolve. So I think we have to be mindful of that. I would ask that when we have a new item that's being proposed on the detail in the staff report, that we have a description for it. For example, garage sale. I know those are new, but there's no verbiage to it, so I'm trying to understand how is that generated. I also want to thank something that I've been asking for years, and I think it's a good thing, is credit card recovery. We, the county for years, you pay by a credit card, like your property tax. You go and pay for a building or encroachment at the county, and you want to use your credit card. You may be getting some good points, but you're also paying for what the county has to pay to utilize that credit card. So in essence, we have been subsidizing that. And I appreciate that finally has come up, because I think that is time. You can still pay by a check. You can still pay by cash. But credit card fees have gone up from the old days. So those are some of my comments for now. Staff, city manager, want to, shall we say, close this up in any way?
Sure. Let's address a few things that were raised by Vice Mayor Medina and yourself, Mayor Rico. With regard to reinspection, it's important to note that it is not all professional licensed contractors that we're inspecting. We are often inspecting homeowners that take out a homeowner's permit in Newport. And we cannot have a reinspection fee for the licensed contract, a reinspection fee for the licensed contractors, and no reinspection fee for the homeowners. And so what we've done is sometimes there's a simple mistake. Hey, you know what? You have to change that one thing, and we'll come back out. And so in order to be amenable to those things, we have historically had the first reinspection free. However, the second and third reinspection have a built-in penalty, which is it's the initial inspection fee plus 25% for the second reinspection. And for the third reinspection, it's the initial inspection fee plus 50%. And so there is sort of that built-in incentive to do it right, because we're not just going to keep coming out because there's a workload, and so there's a financial incentive. But there is that first reinspection, knowing that sometimes things happen, and we have historically been amenable to that. With regard to the film permit, we did have a brief discussion with amongst staff, and we're going to look into bringing that back as simply an hourly rate. We frankly do not have any or many at all, but film.
We don't. We get, it's a beautiful city, but we get about one pre-COVID. But think about a film permit, it's almost like a special event. So Public Works and Police Department used to exercise staff to do roadblock, to do traffic control. It's not just filing a paper with a planning office to say, we're going to be shooting film. There's a lot of labor intensive involved.
Sure. And then the other comment with regard to tickets, A parking ticket is not, the appeal of that is not governed through the fee categories that we were referencing, which is appealing to the council or to staff. Offhand, I do not know the answer to that process, but I know that it is not governed by these fees that we are presenting here. And then, Mr. Mayor, you mentioned credit card processing fees, where we currently do not charge a credit card processing fee. We are looking into that and may add a credit card processing fee. There's sort of a long conversation that we can have into credit card processing fees. One of the biggest challenges with credit card processing fees is that the cost we pay is actually dependent upon the card you use. And so people that use a high mileage card, we actually pay more, just like every vendor. And so in order to implement a credit card processing fee, we cannot charge more than our costs. And we need to do a fine-grained analysis because we have, I believe, over 5 various credit card processing vendors based on how people pay us in utility bills and the IT setup. For example, when you pay rec fees through our recreation software, that's one credit card processor. When you pay your utility bills online, that is that credit card processor. There's a different credit card processor when you pay your city net charges. And so we have to do a very detailed analysis on all of those point of sale vendors and to make sure that whether it's $1, $2, whether it's 1% or 2%. In addition, there is state law that does not allow a processing fee on utility payments. And so we would need to adjust that. And there are models around where we can set up our automatic pay so people can do more bank charges or bank debits than credit cards. And so we are looking into that, and it's sort of interesting you brought up that topic because at our finance department budget meeting today, we talked about that very same topic. So.
And I wasn't eavesdropping in your meeting. I just that's just been something on my mind. And again, honestly, in this county, there are a town and I think a city, you're not allowed to use credit cards when you're doing building and encroachments. You must have check. In one town that I know of, it's checks only, no cash. So I'm not saying that that's the answer. I'm just saying everybody's a little different. And on the appeals, again, one of my more specific questions was firework appeal, because I know they do get a hearing, but I don't know with what level. So, but that's for a future time. And then city manager, do you have kind of the categories that everybody's asked and for your feedback or for making when it comes back?
Yes. So I think we have clear direction. We will make some minor modifications, but bring this back with a comprehensive piece, build it into the budget. To be clear, though, we have not had any conversations where we've had sort of unanimous council decision to make a change. And so, for example, I do know Councilmember Mason mentioned her reluctance with regard to one fee category, which is the appeals. So if the city council would like to provide direction on that here, we will take that direction. Otherwise, we will build them into the fee schedule as proposed. We'll take another look at it. But in our final and our last analysis, they are at the lowest cost recovery level. Although we are proposing to increase those costs. So I would just ask if there's anything that we talked about where one council member mentioned it, please let's revisit those so we walk out of here with clear direction because we are building the budget around these proposed fees.
Okay, so your ask is that we give you clarity to our thought in regards to the appeal fees being raised. Or to the degree they're being raised.
To the degree they're being raised, as well as anything else. So, and for example, film permit. There were a couple of council member comments, and I think staff is comfortable just transitioning that to a at cost model or an hourly rate based on actual costs. And so then anything else, we would ask for clear direction.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if Steph Curry had to, if their organization had to have a permit for using the gym, but we won't get off track. Vice Mayor, your responses to our city manager.
Yeah, just as a former public works inspector, when you get an encroachment permit, you typically are licensed. So if we're talking on the building side where somebody gets a home owner builder permit, then I could see some flexibility. But the penalty that was described by our city manager, that doesn't seem legal, that we're charging more for than an actual cost. But nonetheless, are we distinguishing between a homeowner builder or a licensed contractor? So I believe the way it works in our building department, a homeowner can get a homeowner permit to do something in their home. And that's one thing. If they make a mistake, they're not the professional, and oh, okay, sorry, come back and fix that. Compared to a licensed contractor who pulled the permit, made the mistake, and the inspector needs to come back and see it redone. I think there's a difference there, and I think we should really re-examine that. How often does it occur? Might also help explain how much money that really is that we're not recovering. Thank you.
What about on the question of appeal fees and city manager? I think the filming you already took care of. Was it just the appeal fees that you wanted clarity from us?
Yes, with regard to the vice mayor's comment on inspection charges, we do not have a inspection charge that is specific for a homeowner's permit or a developer's permit. It is simply an inspection cost. And so that's why it is treated consistently across the board. With regard to the legality of the cost structure for the reinspection, the fee model, I believe, addressed that, and the additional cost in sort of the detailed model with the reinspection, it was deemed that was an appropriate level charge to have the initial fee plus 25% and plus 50%. We will certainly go back and look at that, but I believe the model considered that. And Tony Thrasher from Wildan looks like he just popped on the screen to address that as well.
Yeah, so the plus 25% is, well, you can infer it as a penalty. It's actually recovering cost that wasn't previously recovered, right? Because if you're not charging for that second one, but you then start to charge for the third and you incur that 25%, that's merely recovering the cost that you hadn't for the second, right? Because you had to get to the third or second to get to the third, right? So it's not actually a penalty. It's just back recovery of what wasn't recovered from the second. I hope that makes sense.
And then city manager, correct me, appeal fees is what you wanted to hear from us. Was there a second item?
I don't have a second item.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Film permits unless council has something else.
Okay, so Vice Mayor, about the appeal fees?
Right. Yeah. I hear where Councilmember Mason is coming from. I think in the time on my council, being on the council, I think we've had maybe 5 appeals, a couple casinos, code enforcement case, and the cell tower. I can't really remember too many more than that. Is there a mechanism that we could waive the fee? That would seem like if it was a really interesting case that we could waive the fee. If it was something pretty straightforward, that which it seemed like I could recall the the two casino incidents where it was pretty straightforward. That someone in that position was pretty much asking for almost like forgiveness, I think, in a way. It's kind of like it was pretty clear and cut. But anyhow, that's where I'm coming from on it. I don't want to inhibit somebody from appealing a decision that they feel is wrong on their part, but at the same time, that it costs money to have these appeals. So I'm kind of struggling with that a little bit, and not sure exactly how could we provide a better solution to that problem.
And for clarity, the example the Vice Mayor gave is dealer business applications that were denied.
Right.
The city attorney, I apologize. And then Councilmember Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In response to that, Vice Mayor Medina, I do remember a couple of other appeals. I think there's been maybe 2 or 3 appeals involving trees. But be that as it may, I actually don't recommend the city council or anyone waiving those fees. And the reason is, I think, really given by your example, which is if you're only waiving fees for certain kinds of applicants or certain kinds of situations, you're prejudging something about that application. And so in order to maintain your neutrality, if somebody appeals, everybody pays the fee, whatever it is, and you don't waive it before, during, or after.
Okay.
And that's why we have a city attorney. You're right.
Councilmember Hamilton.
So my position on the appeals were, I don't want to see us in a position where we're discouraging people from appealing if they feel that they have a case. But I think waiving the appeal fee would encourage people who know they don't have a case from appealing anyway, just as a, just to be spiteful, and just to make the city jump through an extra hoop. And just as kind of a point of order, I would recommend for this part of the meeting that if there's a specific request to make a change, that the council members say, I would like to do this, and then we can have a show of hands to see if there's support for it, and further discussion as needed. But I think that would be just as a suggestion. It might be a better way to go through it, because I also have a comment on the reinspection and also a proposal as well, but I don't know what point we're on right now.
Okay, why don't we try to get it on the appellant fees, because that was asked, but then Councilmember Hamilton asked the good thing. That's why we're going to go back to the manager based on our second round of comments, to see if there's something else we have to hone in on.
I'm just thinking that in order to provide staff with clear direction, that if we're going to propose changes, someone should propose a very specific change. We all should show of hands, please do that, and then there's no room for misinterpretation.
I totally agree with you, and I think that would help us move it along. So on the appeal fees, we have the Vice Mayor. We'll go to Councilmember Mason. We're going to go back to, like you said, Councilmember Hamilton, and then go to those items. Councilmember Mason. Councilmember Mason? Oh, you took your hand down?
Sorry. No, I'm sorry. My hand was up because I wanted to make sure, City Manager Grogan mentioned the appeals, and I just wanted to also add that the other request was if we could do that grant program as part of the existing initiative, so that we don't, like I said, have to wait another year for to suggest it as an initiative. But we're on appeals right now, so I guess at this point, I don't support increasing any of the appeals. Even what I've just heard right now, clearly there's not that many of them. The difference in cost is very little, and the ability of somebody with less means who may be trying to improve their house, create an ADU or junior ADU is much greater to me. So I would support not increasing the cost on appeals.
Councilmember Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think the Vice Mayor raised some good points, just in kind of refreshing my memory of what we have seen in the past decade. There's only been a handful of appeals, and I believe, I don't know, I think we may have overturned one ever. And I don't think any of those were really related to, a homeowner's projects. They were all very, we had consistently the same type of appeals, and the ones that were related to cell towers, those we decided to put in the city manager's discretion. So if we were going to hold any of the fees, I would say appeals to the director's decisions would be the only one I would say could be held where it is currently. But the ones that are going to require either planning commission appeals or city council appeals are going to require a lot of staff time. They're going to require the city attorney's time. And I think I would say let's do cost recovery on those and maybe hold only on the director's decisions, which is the city manager. And city manager, not that I don't value your time, but I'm thinking that those are not going to require the same level. They're not going to require a meeting, and they should be a little more straightforward.
Mr. Hamilton.
So my comment from before regarding appeals was only that I wouldn't support waiving the fee altogether. I would support leaving them where they are, and the Councilmember Salazar actually helped me decide that by saying these don't happen very often. So it's not like we're leaving a lot of revenue on the table by not raising the fee. So I would support leaving them where they are.
And my comment is I don't think waiving, because I think then people appeal to appeal because, hey, I was told no, so I'm going to make them work a little extra harder to tell me no twice. So, and when we had a situation where it was cleaning up and staff had done so much and the neighborhood was in such an outcry that we even during a meeting had to pause the meeting, send staff back up to come back down for photos. So the point of this, I have a hard time just saying, because all of that time that was spent on that example I'm trying to give without giving more specifics was so time consuming. Called us all together for a special meeting, waited, the applicant almost did not show up, and it was going to be done, and then they walked through the door. So I have a concern just waiving it, period. And then two, at some points too, I think there are some things that really shouldn't be appealed. I think the example was the card room with the vice mayor license. It was like, really, there was no need for an appeal based on what it was. It was factual, it was to the point. They spent a day on it, city staff, and yet it comes. So I'm not being solidified, but I don't believe they should be waived. Don't believe they should be lowered. But I also know we have to keep up with staff time. But I do appreciate, so the one I think we overturned was a tree. And it was to come out, they appealed it, I believe, if my memory's right, and we said, okay, keep the tree. I mean, and again, do you have it if they win the appeal? Can they be refunded? I don't know, or have 50% back. So, city manager.
Thank you, Mayor Medina. Just a clarification on Councilmember Tom Hamilton's comment with regard to appeal of staff decisions. And so it's not just city manager decisions. And honestly, there's sort of few of that nature that sort of enter the appeal realm. Most of them are actually on the development side. And so as per our code, the Director of Community and Economic Development is empowered to make certain decisions. And those could be appealable. Parking compliance, temporary use permits, zoning determinations, side yard parking permits, minor facade improvements, and tree removals. So those, should they be appealed, would typically, some of those would go to the Planning Commission. Actually, most of those would go to the Planning Commission. And then that could also be potentially appealed from Planning Commission to the City Council. So even those, because they're involving development, will require a substantial amount of staff work and public meetings. And so you just shouldn't infer from that it's a staff level appeal that it's more quick.
Through the mayor, so to clarify, the what I was hearing through council comments is that these appeals don't happen very often. But what you're saying is that as a council member, you wouldn't necessarily see a whole lot of appeals because there's a lot of them happening at staff level. Is that fair to say? And do we have? I hate to even ask, but do we have any metrics to know, how many appeals in general do we have? Because again, I was supporting, leave them where they are based on the fact that there aren't very many. That means that we're not leaving a lot of revenue on the table. But if there's a lot of them, then we are leaving a lot of revenue on the table. So it's important for the decision.
Thank you, Council Member Hamilton. The high level answer is there are not many appeals at all. And so should council want to leave them where they are or up them at the proposed level, it's totally a policy decision, and we'll of course take direction.
Thank you. So so if you're keeping a tally, Mr. Mayor, I'll keep my recommendation where it is. Thank you.
Thank you. And I was hoping the city manager was keeping a tally. Vice Mayor.
Yes, thank you. Right. The wave thing, the city attorney convinced me pretty quickly on that. That wasn't going to happen. And based on what was just said, I'm fine with leaving them where they're at. And we'll just see how it goes. Thank you.
Okay. So I think we have consensus to leave them where they're at. That's it. I think also if we see an influx or we just realize other things, we got that. But city manager too, I do want to go back. I see your hand up, but I do want to go back to any other things like we're talking about grants. We're talking about, let's make sure whatever you heard that you need clarity, please outline them now so I can go around the room once and we can move on to our next topic. I'll take any assistance from you, city manager.
Thank you, Mayor Medina. So just for clarity, we will change the film permit to be actual costs. We will leave the appeals at their current level. I believe Councilmember Hamilton has a new issue that we'll go to next. But I want to address Councilmember Mason's point on a potential grant program for small business attraction, looking at potentially areas where small businesses may pay fees and adding that to what was placed as a strategic initiative for an economic development initiative for small business attraction. No problem incorporating that idea with that strategic initiative, but it is important to point out and remind council that we currently do not have resources to begin that strategic initiative. At this point, I cannot tell you when that strategic initiative will begin. We will be coming back to you with an update on all of your strategic initiatives and provide you with a new status, what the budgetary allocations and a projection on when work will begin. And so we can certainly add it to the concept of that initiative, but I just want council to have a clear understanding that based on current workload, we are not envisioning beginning on that initiative right now.
Okay, thank you for the clarity. Councilmember Hamilton, I'm sorry.
So I would like us to go back to what I had brought up earlier regarding the administrative review for wireless facility. So we've already established that does not apply to small cell towers, which my understanding from what the city attorney told us, that's where there would be where it could get sticky if we try to get full cost recovery. But since it doesn't and it only applies to full cell towers, I would recommend that we move administrative review wireless facility into the full cost recovery tier.
We're going to go to the vice mayor, but I'll give you my comment. I agree. Vice Mayor.
I do agree with Councilman Hamilton and the mayor on those items. Do we have any information on how other cities handle reinspection fees? It would be nice maybe if we were consistent in the area. That would be beneficial. But I think we should have a charge for a reinspection fee, and I'll leave it at that.
Let's hear from Salazar and Mason in regards to the wireless review and having it at full.
I'm in favor of that.
Councilmember Mason?
I agree.
Okay, that one was very clear. So you have consensus there. And I think the Vice Mayor had asked about reinspection. City Manager? And then also about comparison to our neighboring communities.
Yeah, we may be able to get that information. We have various staff members pulling up the websites of our neighboring cities to see their reinspection fees. But just to recap, we are leaving film at cost. We're changing film fees to be at cost. We are leaving the appeal charges at their current level, no increase. We are moving the review of wireless facilities to full cost recovery. And those are the three changes that we have now.
Vice Mayor.
Yes, thank you. The one thing I didn't know, I noticed wasn't going up was the administrative fines for nuisances. And those fine levels were set at least 12 years ago. And it seems like if the fines should be kind of following along inflation as well, so why wouldn't we having the citations go up? The administrative fines.
And I know I'm going to call on the city attorney.
Thank you. So the reason for the administrative fines as currently established is because those are the maximum fines that are allowed by state law for general law cities. And it's 100, 200, 500. The state law was recently amended to actually allow for additional fines for building code violations of certain kinds. And then when we brought the particular section of the municipal code to you that had those fines in it, we made sure there was a provision in there that said, as amended by the recent state law. So you are now still charging the maximum amount of fines that are available. I do want to note there was some discussion about, well, San Jose is charging a $10,000 fine or proposing a huge fine for illegal dumping. And the answer as to why they can do that and no other cities that are general law cities can't is because they're a charter city.
Charter city.
However, I would point out before you jump to the conclusion that that's a great reason to be a charter city, is that the fines that even charter cities charge have to be consistent with their own charter. And not only that, and perhaps more importantly, is they have to be consistent with the excessive fines provision of the United States Constitution. So there is plenty of litigation to go around regarding whether particular fines are or are not excessive. And for example, the city of Los Angeles, a case I reported on a couple of months ago, is being sued over a penalty on a parking ticket that adds up to, I think, about $100 as an excessive fine. And the cities, even charter cities, that charge large fines for code enforcement issues, and even when those issues are at particular properties, when those fines are imposed for non-life health and safety conditions or are imposed on people of less financial means, they really do tend to make the front page of the newspaper. And so it might seem like a good idea to impose a huge fine on people to deter, but when the fine is actually imposed, then it creates a problem that the city needs to deal with. So that's a long answer to a short question, but I wanted to be sure the city council had all the context on that.
No, I appreciate you taking that time, because I do know, and as we all know, right, that we're going to get emails when we do that say, hey, I saw this, and why not just do that? And even when it came to firework stands, you know, why didn't you, at the time when you raised it from 500 to 1,000, because that's what state law allowed us to do. We can't supersede that. So we have general law cities, we have government codes, et cetera. So, but thank you for that, Mr. City.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
And I think San Jose, And I think San Jose also is raising their citation on illegal fireworks, and I'm guessing the same answer, that they're a charter city and they're also subject to some litigation on that. Is that right, City Attorney?
Well, I actually haven't looked at what San Jose is doing beyond just a short blurb that I was provided with, so I don't really know exactly. I haven't spoken to their city attorney. So I don't know a lot of details about that. What I do know is that general law cities are limited by state law, and charter cities are going to be limited by both their charter and the excessive fines provision of the Constitution, as are general law cities as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, City Manager, is there any other topic or areas that you need information from us on? You're on mute.
No, we have been able to find reinspection fees from a few cities, Burlingame, Middlebrook, and Union City at this point, and they are charging a reinspection rate. The structures vary. Some cities have a more expensive inspection fee, and so it appears to cover no matter how many inspections you have. But the cities that appear to be based on hourly rate are charging for that reinspection. So if the city council wanted to go with that model, we would adjust our inspection model, but not be out of alignment with what other cities do. Now, that's not a comprehensive benchmarking, that's just sort of a quick check. And so at a high level, I would say if you went with our current structure or a structure where we charged for the first reinspection, that model would not be atypical. I would then just say that we would need to adjust our second and third reinspection to take away that 25 and 50%, because as Mr. Thrasher mentioned, that was meant to cover costs that wasn't charged for the first reinspection.
Thank you. Councilmember Hamilton, and then you can chime in on what your thoughts are. Please.
Sure. So my comment on the reinspection is that I agree, especially in the case of a homeowner doing their own stuff, that they should get a free shot at it if they're not a professional. And I completely agree with the Vice Mayor that a licensed contractor shouldn't be making those types of mistakes. But what makes me be against charging for the first reinspection is that if I have a contractor, a licensed contractor doing an addition on my house, and he makes a mistake and he ends up getting re-inspected, he's not going to pay that fee. I'm going to pay that fee as the homeowner. He's just going to pass it along to me. So I don't necessarily think we should that's going to be a disincentive for folks to intentionally or whatever try to get something by the first inspector or anything like that. And I don't think, because I don't think it's going to end up being a deterrent for a licensed contractor, and I think it would hurt homeowners more. That's my take.
So no. Thank you, sir.
Either way, what's proposed is fine with me.
Got it. Mr. Salazar, Mrs. Mason, sorry.
I'll chime in. I agree that I don't think we need to charge a reinspection fee. We're bumping up the initial fee. I don't know that there's a lot of second visits that are required for a lot of the permits that we're issuing, and I agree with Councilmember Hamilton that it's better to provide an incentive to homeowners to get their work permitted and do it, and not have to worry about getting dinged with an additional cost on their projects.
Councilmember Mason?
Yeah, I'm really mixed on this one. I apologize for asking because I know you've said it. What is the third one? The third inspection? So the first reinspection is right now free, and then the third one you mentioned 25%. Can you say that one more time?
Sure. There's a charge for the first inspection. For the first re-inspection, so the second inspection, there's no charge. For the second re-inspection, which would be the third inspection, there's the initial fee plus 25%. And for the third re-inspection, there is the initial fee plus 50%. As a caveat, if I will say that sort of a change like this may be one of those changes that some of our routine customers are used to, and we may get negative feedback for a change where the customers that used to dealing with us may say, well, in your structure, I used to get the first reinspection free that way for the last 15 years, and now I have to pay for that. And so we may get negative feedback. I think that's something just to consider in the model, but it certainly should not be the primary thing you consider.
I kind of laugh because I feel like we're going to get negative feedback on this whole, everything we've heard tonight. But I think that I do recall, I will say, hearing that there are quite a few second inspections, but I think that where, as much as I'm sure everybody tries to make the inspections objective so that when someone comes to your house, they have a checklist of what's going to be approved, you could have an inspector that might be harder than another inspector. Someone may have interpreted a rule wrong. I'm really mixed on this one. I'm okay with leaving it as is. Just not knowing the metrics, I think makes a big difference for me. But I think right now I'm okay with leaving it as is. If the third one means that you haven't done it in the reinspection, so that's kind of like your grace period, and the third one is punitive because you're paying the same amount plus the 25%. So I'm okay with leaving it.
Okay, so we have clear for right now that we'll leave it as is. Was there anything else, City Manager?
I don't think everybody took a position.
I think they did. I think everybody was leave it as is with the exception of the Vice Mayor. And am I incorrect? I'm sorry, Councilmember May, was I incorrect?
No, it's my mistake. I thought not everybody had spoken.
Oh, okay. This time I was keeping tally. Last time I didn't. Vice Mayor Medina.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, did you brought up missed appointments, missed inspections?
I did.
Is that something you wanted to follow up on?
Okay, we might as well throw that in as City Manager. So, and let me say, sometimes they allowed the first, but by the second, again, staff's resources, it's time. And where it is that the person who made the appointment, whether it was the resident or it was the company, they were then held for a reinspection fee, per se. I think that's what they called it, for a missed appointment. Any thoughts on that, City Manager, or to our consultants? Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Sure. So unfortunately, we do not have clear information to provide you on that. What I can say is that we do not have a missed inspection charge. And so what I believe happens, and we can confirm this and communicate it to council, is if the mistake was of the homeowner or contractor, they are not charged a missed inspection fee, but they are charged the next time for that sort of first inspection. And so in the event that a missed inspection only results in one inspection, the city would recoup the same amount of revenue. We would only have a revenue because the second reinspection is free, right? We would only have sort of a true revenue loss if there was a missed inspection and there needed to be more than 2 inspections for that permit.
Okay, and I may have just skipped a beat here, no disrespect. Maybe you just said it and I didn't interpret it correctly. So I'm referencing, I make an appointment for tomorrow. I have an appointment between 2 and 4, and the inspector comes, and then they come back again. They come at 2, they're calling me, they come back at 3:30. I don't show up, I don't call. And that's what I'm referencing. Maybe you said that and I just misinterpreted it.
Right. So I do not have clarity to answer that question clearly on a charge in that case.
Okay. Is that something colleagues want to see looked at, or leave it be?
I would want to know how often it's happening.
Okay, Metro.
You know, if it's a chronic problem that maybe we should address by putting a fee structure in place, then sure. If it's something that happens rarely but once in a while, then you probably don't need anything for it.
Okay, fair. Anyone else?
So through the mayor,
Yes, city manager?
just to clarify direction, so what we'll do on that is we will talk to staff and see can we get any metrics on how many missed inspections we have where it's clearly the fault of the person calling for the inspection. Should there be a significant amount of those, when we bring this back to you, I think we would propose a missed inspection charge. And if it appears that that it's far few and in between, we would leave the structure as is. Just for if council is okay with that process, I think we can have clarity on this point and move forward.
I see a thumbs up for Mr. Hamilton. I see yes. I see yes. I see yes. All yes. Yes. Okay. I believe we are concluded with that topic.